Students, today we are going to learn chapter 6, that is life processes. What are life processes and how they are important for us? How do we tell the difference between what is alive and what is not alive? If we see a dog running, or a cow chewing cud, or a man shouting loudly on the street, we know that these are living beings. What if the dog or the cow or the man were asleep? We would still think that they were alive. But how did we know that? We see them breathing and we know that they are alive. What about plants? How do we know that they are alive? We see them green, some of us will say, but what about the plants that have leaves of colors other than green? They grow over time, so we know that they are alive. Some will say, in other words, we tend to think of some sort of movement, either growth related or not, as common evidence for being alive. But a plant that is not visibly growing is still alive, and some animals can breathe without visible movement. So, using visible movement as the definite characteristics of life is not enough. So, it means that a living being without moving, or you cannot see any movement on the living being, so the visible movement cannot be taken as the characteristics of life. Movements over very small scales will be invisible to the naked eyes. Movement of molecules, for example, is this invisible molecular movement necessary for life? If we ask the question to professional biologists, they will say yes. In fact, viruses do not show any molecular movement in them, and that is partially why there is a controversy about whether they are truly alive or not. So there are some organisms which do not show any kind of movement, but they function, and that's why viruses are still a matter of controversy whether they are alive or not. Why the molecular movements needed for life? We have seen earlier classes that living organisms are well organized structure. They have tissues, tissues have cells, cells have smaller components in them, and so on. Because of the effect of the environment, this organized, ordered nature of living structures is very likely to keep breaking down over time. If the order breaks down, the organism will no longer be alive. So living creatures must keep repairing and maintaining their structures. Since all these structures are made up of molecules, they must move molecules around all the times. As we know, all the things as well as human beings are made up of molecules. So in order to be alive, all these molecules must be keep on moving. So that is the basic need of the life. So in order to keep moving the molecules, there are some processes. So let's see what are the processes. So what are life processes? The maintenance function of living organism must go on even when we are just sitting in class, even if we are just asleep. This maintenance job has to go on. This process which together perform this maintenance job are called life processes. Means the processes which keep us alive, whether we are doing any work or not. At the time we are sitting, at the time we are sleeping, this function or this process keeps on going. That are the life processes. Since these maintenance processes are needed to prevent damage and breakdown, energy is needed for them. This energy comes from outside the body of the individual organism. So there must be a process to transfer a source of energy from outside the body of the organism, which we call food, to the inside, a process we commonly call nutrition. If the body size of the organism is to grow, additional raw material will also be needed from outside. Since the life on Earth depends on carbon-based molecule, most of these food sources are also carbon-based. Depending on the complexity of these carbon sources, different organisms can use different kinds of nutritional processes. Just we saw that in order to keep our life going on, the molecules must keep working. So in order to keep this process, we need energy. So most of the energy sources are carbon based. So they are to be taken into our body and converted into the required format. So let's see how it is done. So that is the first process, and that is called nutrition. The outside source of energy could be quite varied, since the environment is not under the control of individual organism. These sources of energy therefore need to be broken down or built up in the body and must be finally converted into a uniform source of energy that can be used for the various molecular movements needed for maintaining living structures, as well as to the kind of molecules the body needs to grow. For this, a series of chemical reactions in the body are necessary. Oxidizing, reducing reactions are some of the most common chemical means to break down the molecules. For this, many organisms use oxygen sourced from the outside the body. The process of acquiring oxygen from outside the body and used to in the process of a breakdown process of food is called respiration. So as you got it, that the body needs energy, and the energy is available the outside the body. So the energy is to be taken, and the energy required by our body is not available in that form that our body needs. So we have to take the food, and it has to be converted into the form that our body accepts. So the process which is required to take oxygen is called respiration. And let's see what is the entire process of respiration. In the case of single-celled organism, no specific organ for taking in food. Exchange of gases or removal of wastes may be needed because the entire surface of the organism is in contact with the environment. But what happens when the body size of the organism increases? The body design becomes more complex. In multicellular organisms, all the cells may not be in direct contact with the surrounding environment. Thus, simple diffusion will not meet the requirements of all the cells. So, in case of taking food, single-celled organisms which have no specific organs for taking in food, in case of amoeba, it can take food from any side of its body. But in the complex organism like us, humans, animals, so the parts, every part has a specific function, and the food is taken through the mouth, and the food is then digested. So the simple diffusion will not meet the requirements of the cells. We have seen previously how in multicellular organisms various body parts have specialized in the functions they perform. We are familiar with the idea of these specialized tissues and with their organization in the body of the organism. It is therefore not surprising that the uptake of food and of oxygen will also be the function of specialized tissues. However, this poses a problem. Since the food and oxygen are now taken up one place in the body of the organism, while all parts of the body need them, This situation creates a need of transportation, the system for carrying food and oxygen from one place to another place in the body. Now, what does this means? For example, the oxygen is taken by a single part. The food is taken by a single part. But the energy produced from these is required by the whole body. So there must be a mechanism through which the energy should be supplied all over the body, all parts of the body. So there is a need of a transportation system. When chemical reactions use the carbon source and oxygen for the energy generation, they create byproducts that are not only useless for the cells of the body but could even be harmful. So these waste byproducts are therefore needed to removed from the body and discarded outside by a process called excretion. Again, if the basic rules for the body design in multicellular organisms are followed, a specialized tissue for excretion will be developed, which means the transportation system will need to transport the waste away from the cells to these excretory tissues. Now we take oxygen, we take the food, then the food is digested, and in the process of digestion so many harmful products are also created. So these harmful products are going to harm the body. So in order to keep our body safe, this has to be removed from the body. So this process is called excretion. So there are some special technique that these harmful particles are to be sent to the place where it is excreted. Next, let's see what is nutrition. When we walk or ride on a bicycle, we are using up energy, but when we are not doing any apparent activity, energy is needed to maintain the state of our body. We also need material from outside in order to grow, develop, synthesize protein and other substances needed in the body. This source of energy and materials is the food we eat. Means the body is needed for our body. The body needs energy whether we are working or not. So the food is obtained from the food that we eat, and process is called nutrition. So how do living organisms or living things get their food? The general requirement for energy and material is common in all organisms, but it is fulfilled in different ways. Some organisms use simple food materials obtained from inorganic sources in the form of CO2 and water. These organisms, that is autotrophs, include green plants and some bacteria. Other organisms use complex substances. These complex substances have to be broken down into simpler ones before they can be used for the upkeep and growth of the body. To achieve this, the organism use biocatalysts called enzymes. Thus, the heterotroph's survival depends directly or indirectly on autotrophs. Heterotrophic organisms include animals and fungi. So we will see in the detail that some organisms prepare food from inorganic sources, and some had to depend on the other animals or other organisms for their survival. They are called heterotrophs. So autotrophs are capable of making their food from inorganic sources, but heterotrophs organisms are to be dependent on the other organism. So some animal fungi are heterotrophs. So what happens in autotrophic nutrition? Carbon and energy requirement of the autotrophic organisms are fulfilled by photosynthesis. As you know, it is the process by which autotrophs take in substance from outside and convert them into stored forms of energy. This material is taken in the form of CO2 and water, which is converted into carbohydrates in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. Carbohydrates are utilized for providing energy to the plant, and we will study how this takes place in the next section. The carbohydrates which are not used immediately are stored in the form of starch, which serves as internal energy reserve to be used as when required by the plant. A somewhat similar situation is seen in us when some of the energy derived from the food we eat is stored in our body in the form of glycogen. So in autotrophic nutrition, the carbon energy is required by the autotrophic or your autotrophs, and they convert them into energy and for form of energy, and when the energy is needed, they produce the energy, and the remaining energy is stored in the form of starch. So this is the chemical equation for the process of photosynthesis, that is carbon dioxide and water in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight produce glucose and oxygen. So how the photosynthesis occur? First process is absorption of light by the chlorophyll, and the light energy is converted to chemical energy by splitting of water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. And next one is reduction of carbon dioxide to carbohydrates. So in photosynthesis, the first process is that the chlorophyll absorbs the sunlight. Then the light energy is converted into chemical energy by splitting of water molecule. As you know the formula of water, that is H2O. In this, hydrogen and oxygens are separated. And finally, the reduction of carbon dioxide is into carbohydrates. So these steps need not take place one after the another immediately. For example, the desert plants take up carbon dioxide at night and prepare the intermediate which is acted upon by the energy absorbed by the chlorophyll during the day. So whatever steps are required in the photosynthesis, it is not necessary that they will take one by one. It will take some time, as it is said in the book that desert plants take up the CO2 at night, and they prepare the food during the daytime. So see the components of the above reaction, that is photosynthesis, which are necessary. So in the figure, it is a cross section of a leaf. A leaf contains midrib, lamina, and vein. And the vascular bundle, that is xylem and phloem. We will see what are the uses of xylem and phloem. And in the leaf there are some waxy cuticles, and the first layer is called upper epidermis, and inside this there are chloroplast and air spaces and guard cells. We will also see what are the functions of guard cells. Okay, we will move next. Now we will see or study how the plants obtain carbon dioxide. In class 9th we have talked about stomata. Stomata are tiny pores present on the surface of leaves. Massive amount of gaseous exchange takes place in the leaves through these pores for the purpose of photosynthesis. But it is important to note here that the exchange of gases occurs across the surface of the stems, roots and leaves as well. Since large amount of water can be lost through these stomata, the plant closes these pores when it is not needed, or when the carbon dioxide is not needed anymore. So see the open pores and closed pores of stomata. So a stomata has a guard cells, and the opening are called stomatal pores, and the small things are called chloroplast, which absorbs the light energy. So simply, when there is a need of carbon dioxide, the stomatal pores opens, but if there is no need of CO2, it closes. So exchange not only takes from these pores only, and they can take through the stem, roots and leaves also. Okay, next we will see heterotrophic nutrition. What is heterotrophic nutrition? Each organism is adapted to its environment. The form of nutrition differs depending on the type and availability of the food material, as well as how it is obtained by the organism. For example, whether the food source is stationary such as grass or mobile such as deer would allow for differences how the food is accessed and what is the nutritive apparatus used by a cow and a lion. There is a range of strategies by which food is taken and used by the organism. Some organisms break down the food material outside the body and then absorb it. Example, fungi and bread molds, yeast, mushrooms. Others take in food the whole material and break it down inside the bodies. What can be taken in and broken down depends on the body design and functioning. Some other organisms derive nutrition from plants or animals without killing them. This parasitic nutritive strategy is used by a variety of organisms like excreta and ticks, lice, leeches and tapeworms. So, in heterotrophic, the source of food is either static, like grass, which does not move, and for heterotrophic, another is a moving one, that is deer. The deer is eaten by, or we can say the deer is the food of lion, and it is not static, it keeps on moving. So there is a range of strategy by which the food is taken inside. So some organisms take the food which is already converted into energy, so there is no need of conversion. But some organisms take food and then they convert it into the required format of energy inside their body. And some organisms derive nutrition from plants and animals without killing them, means they remain on the body or inside the body to get the nutrition. Next, how do organisms obtain their nutrition? Since the food and the way it is obtained differ, the digestive system is different in various organisms. In single cell organisms, the food may be taken in by the entire surface, but as the complexity of the organism increases, different parts become specialized to perform different functions. For example, amoeba takes food during using temporary finger-like extension. The cell surfaces fuse over and the food particles forming food vacuoles. Inside the food vacuoles, the complex substances are broken down into simpler ones, which then diffused into the cytoplasm. The remaining undigested material is moved out to the surface of the cell and thrown out. In paramecium also, which is a unicellular organism like amoeba, the cell has definite shape and the food is taken at a specific spot. Food is moved by this spot by the movement of cilia, which cover the entire surface of the cell. So how do the organism get or obtain their nutrition? The first example is amoeba. As we discussed earlier, amoeba has no definite shape and it can take its food particles from anywhere or any part of its body. The food particles is taken, and the whatever portion of the body comes out, that is called cytopodia. And again, the inside the food vacuole, the food is digested, and the remaining undigested food are thrown out of the body. Then next we will see the nutrition in human beings. The alimentary canal is basically a long tube extending from the mouth to anus. We can see that the tube has different parts. Various regions are specialized to perform different functions. What happens to the food once it enters our body? We shall discuss the process here. So first you see the diagram. So this is then tongue, mouth, it is also called buccal cavity, esophagus, which is a long pipe. Then inside there is small stomach, then gallbladder, bile duct, small intestine, then large intestine, and pancreas, liver, appendix, and annex. So what is the process, how the food is taken and how it works? We eat various types of food which has to pass through the same digestive tract. Naturally, the food has to be processed to generate particles which are small and the same texture. This is achieved by the crushing the food with our teeth. Since the lining of the canal is soft and the food is also wetted to make its passage smooth, when we eat something like we like, our mouth waters. This is actually not only water but a fluid called saliva secreted by the salivary gland. Please remember this, saliva which is secreted by salivary glands. Another aspect of the food we inject is complex nature. If it is to be absorbed by the alimentary canal, it has to be broken into smaller molecules. This is done with the help of biological catalyst called enzymes. So enzymes helps to break down the food. Then the saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase that breaks down starch, which is a complex molecule, to give sugar. So salivary amylase break down the starch to give sugar. Then the food is mixed thoroughly with saliva and moved around the mouth while chewing the muscular tongue. It is necessary to move the food in a regulated manner along the digestive tube so that it can be processed properly in each part. The lining of the canal has muscles that contract rhythmically in order to push the food forward. This peristaltic movement occurs along the gut. So here you remember this peristaltic movement. That means the walls of the stomach, it keeps on moving in a particular order. It means it contracts and expands to push down the food. From the mouth, the food is taken to the stomach through the food pipe or esophagus. The stomach is a large organ which expands when the food enters it. The muscular walls of the stomach help in mixing the food thoroughly with the more digestive juices. So So what are the digestive juices? These digestion functions are taken care of by the gastric glands present in the wall of the stomach. This releases first one, hydrochloric acid, a protein digestive enzyme called pepsin, and mucus. Three things, remember: hydrochloric acid, pepsin, and mucus. The hydrochloric acid creates an acidic medium which facilitates the action of enzyme pepsin. What other function do you think it is served by the acid? The mucus protects the inner lining of the stomach from the action of the acid under normal condition. Means the hydrochloric acid may have the side effects, but it is protected by the mucus wall. We have often heard adults complaining about acidity. So this is related to this one, that is the hydrochloric acid. The exit of food from the stomach is regulated by a sphincter muscle which releases in small amount into the small intestine. From the stomach, the food now enters the small intestine. This is the longest part of the alimentary canal, which is fitted into a compact space because of the extensive coiling. The length of the small intestine differs in various animals depending on the food they eat. Herbivores eating grass needs a longer small intestine to allow the cellulose to be digested. Meat is easier to digest, hence the carnivores like tigers have shorter and small intestine. So after that the food enters to the small intestine. So the small intestine are coiled and it depends upon the type of food that is being taken. So in some animals they are very long. For example, herbivores eating grass need a longer small intestine because it needs it allows to glucose to or cellulose to be digested. Meat is easier to digest, hence carnivores like tigers have a shorter. So simply you can say animals have longer small intestine and tigers have the smaller means herbivores have the longer small intestine and the carnivores have shorter small intestine. The small intestine is the site of the complete digestion of the carbohydrate, proteins and fats. It receives the secretion of the liver and pancreas for this purpose. The food coming from the stomach is acidic and it has to be made alkaline for the pancreatic enzymes to act. Bile juice from the liver accomplishes this in addition to acting on fat. Fats are present in the intestine in the form of large globules which make it difficult for enzyme to act on them. Bile salt breaks them down into smaller globules, increasing the efficiency of enzyme action. This is similar to the emulsifying action of soaps on dirt we have learnt about in chapter 4. The pancreas secretes pancreatic juice which contains enzymes like trypsin for digesting proteins and lipase for breaking down of emulsifying fats. The walls of a small intestine contains glands which secrete intestinal juice. The enzymes present in it finally convert the proteins to amino acid, complex carbohydrates into glucose, fats into fatty acids and glycerol. So you have to remember all the enzymes. First one is the bile juice from the liver. It acts on fats and The pancreas secretes the pancreatic juice, which contains enzymes like trypsin, and it is used for digesting protein. And intestinal juice, which is secreted by the intestinal or small intestine. The digested food is taken up by the walls of the intestine. The inner lining of the small intestine has numerous finger-like projection called villi, which increases the structure area for absorption. The villi are richly supplied with blood vessels which take the blood vessels which take the absorbed food to each and every cell of the body, where it is utilized for obtaining energy, building up new tissues, and repair of old tissues. So there are some finger-like projection in small intestine called villi, which are used to absorb the food material and then transport to the various parts of the body. And after the digestion, the unabsorbed food is sent to the large intestine, where more villi absorb water from this material. The rest of the material is removed from the body via anus. The exit of the waste material is regulated by the anal sphincter. Right. The next process comes is the respiration. We have discussed nutrition in organism is the last section. The food material is taken during the process of nutrition is used in the cells to provide energy for various life processes. And diverse organisms do this in different ways. Some use oxygen to break down glucose completely into carbon dioxide and water. Some use other pathways that do not involve oxygen. So in the case, the first step is the breakdown of glucose, a 6-carbon molecule into 3-carbon molecule called pyruvate. This process is taken place in the cytoplasm. Further, the pyruvate may be converted into ethanol or CO2, that is carbon dioxide. This process takes place in yeast during fermentation. So, if you are asked which process is taken in yeast, that is called fermentation. And what happens in this process? The pyruvate is converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. Since this process takes place in the absence of air, it is called anaerobic respiration. Another important point, the process which takes place in the absence of air or oxygen is called anaerobic, and which takes in presence of air or oxygen is called aerobic. So breakdown of pyruvate using oxygen takes place in mitochondria. Another important point, the breakdown of pyruvate using oxygen takes place in mitochondria. So this process breaks up 3-carbon pyruvate molecule to give 3 molecules of CO2. The other product is water. Since this process takes place in the presence of air or oxygen, it is called aerobic respiration. So remember aerobic and anaerobic. The real energy in this aerobic process is a lot greater than in the anaerobic process. Sometimes when there is a lack of oxygen in our muscles, another pathway for the breakdown of pyruvate is taken. Here the pyruvate is converted into lactic acid, which is also 3-carbon molecule. This build up the lactic acid in our muscles during sudden activity causes cramps. So see the diagram. First glucose is which is a 6-carbon molecule is in the presence of cytoplasm it converted into pyruvate, that is 3-carbon molecule and energy, and in the presence of oxygen, that is aerobic, ethanol and CO2 and energy is created, that is 2-carbon molecule. And in the lack of oxygen it creates lactic acid and energy, and in the presence of oxygen it creates carbon dioxide and water and energy. So let's see the diagram. Glucose in the cytoplasm is converted into pyruvate, that is a 3-carbon molecule. In the absence of oxygen, that is in yeast, ethanol and carbon dioxide and energy is created. So it is a anaerobic process because it is done in the absence of air. And in the lack of oxygen, lactic acid and energy is created, and in the presence of oxygen, like in mitochondria, carbon dioxide and water and energy is created. So, the energy released during the cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP. I think you know the full form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is used to fuel all other activities in cells. In this process, ATP is broken down, giving rise to a fixed amount of energy which can drive endothermic reaction taking place in the cell. Since the aerobic respiration pathway depends on oxygen, aerobic organisms need to ensure that there is sufficient intake of oxygen. We have seen that plants exchange gases the plant exchange gases through stomata, and large intercellular spaces ensure that the cells are in contact with the air. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged by diffusion here. They can go into cells or other way from them and out into the air. The direction of diffusion depends upon the environmental condition and the requirements of the plant. At night, when there is no photosynthesis occurring, carbon dioxide elimination is the major exchange activity going on. During the day, CO2 is generated during the respiration and is used for photosynthesis. Hence, there is no CO2 release. Instead, oxygen release is the major event at this time. Next, animals have evolved different organs for the uptake of oxygen from the environment and for getting rid of the carbon dioxide produced. Terrestrial animals can breathe in the oxygen in the atmosphere, but animals that live in water need to use the oxygen dissolved in water. The terrestrial animals animals live on land, and aquatic animals which live on water. So they need to use the water. In the water, they absorb the oxygen. since the amount of dissolved oxygen is fairly low as compared to the amount of oxygen in the air. So the rate of breathing in aquatic organism is much faster than the terrestrial organism. Fishes take in water through their mouths and therefore force it past the gills where the dissolved oxygen is taken up by the blood. Terrestrial organisms use the oxygen in the atmosphere for respiration. This oxygen is absorbed by the different organs in different animals. All these organs have a structure that increases the surface area which is contact with the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Since this surface is very fine and delicate, in order to protect this surface, it is usually placed within the body. So there have to be passages that will take air to this area. In addition, there are mechanisms for moving the air in and out of this area. So, how the respiration process takes place in human? In human being, the air is taken into the body through the nostrils. The air passing through the nostrils is filtered by the fine hairs that line the passage. The passage is also lined with mucus, which helps in the process. From there, the air passes through the throat and into the lungs. See the diagram. So there is a nasal passage and it passes through trachea, larynx is there, and rings of cartilage inside. There are lungs, then there are alveoli which are respiratory bronchioles. So what happens? Within the lungs, the passage divides into smaller and smaller tubes which finally terminate in balloon-like structures which are called alveoli. The alveoli provides a surface where the exchange of gases can take place. The walls of the alveoli can contain an extensive network of body vessels, as we have seen in earlier years, when we breathe in, we lift our ribs and flatten our diaphragm, and the chest cavity becomes larger as a result. Because of this, air is sucked into the lung and fills the expanded alveoli. Blood brings carbon dioxide from the rest of the body for release into the alveoli, and the oxygen in the alveolar air is taken up by the blood in the alveolar blood vessels to be transported by all the cells in the body. During the breathing cycle, when the air is taken in and let out, the lungs always contain a residual volume of air so that there is sufficient time for oxygen to be absorbed and for the carbon dioxide to be released. When the body size of animal is large, the diffusion pressure is alone cannot be take care of oxygen delivery to all parts of the body. Instead, respiratory pigment take up oxygen from the air in the lungs and carry it to the tissues which are deficient in oxygen before releasing it. In human beings, the respiratory pigment is hemoglobin, which is very high affinity for oxygen. This pigment is present in the RBC, and that is red blood corpuscles. Carbon dioxide is more soluble in water than oxygen, and hence it is mostly transported in the dissolved form in our blood. The next comes the transportation. So How the transportation in human being takes place. We have already discussed transportation means the food and other material has to be transported, means taken all over the body by the process. We have seen the previous section that the blood transport food, oxygen and waste material in our bodies. We learnt about the blood being a fluid connective tissue. Blood consists of a fluid medium called plasma, which the cells are suspended. Plasma transport food, carbon dioxide and nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. Oxygen is carried by RBC, and many other substances like salts are also transported by the blood. We thus need a pumping organ to push the blood around the body, a network of tubes to reach all the tissues, and a system in place to ensure this network can be repaired if damaged. So as I said, the food and other materials are to be transported all over the body. So here the RBC or red blood cells comes into the action. So RBC contains plasma, which contains or transport the food, carbon dioxide and nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. So the blood has to be keep on going throughout the body. So for this purpose there must be a pumping system or pumping organ which can push and back all the blood cells. So and it has to be taken care whether if it is damaged, how it can be corrected. So what is a pumping system? Our pump is the heart. The heart is a muscular organism which is as big as our fist. Because both oxygen and carbon dioxide have to be transported by the blood, the heart has different chambers to prevent oxygen-rich blood from mixing the blood containing carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide-rich blood has to reach the lungs for the carbon dioxide to be removed, and the oxygenated blood from the lungs has to be brought back to the heart. This oxygen-rich blood is then pumped to the body. We can follow this process step by step. See in the figure, the arrow shows from where the blood comes in and how it goes out. Next, oxygen enters the blood in the lungs. The separation of the right side and the left side of the heart is useful to keep the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing. So in the heart there are two chambers. In one chamber there is oxygenated blood and another one is deoxygenated blood. So it helps to keep separately the blood. This is useful in animals that have high energy needs, such as birds and mammals, which constantly use energy to maintain their body temperature. In animals that do not use energy for this purpose, the body temperature depends on the temperature in the environment. Such animals like amphibians, many reptiles, have a three-chambered heart. See, Many amphibians have three-chambered heart and tolerate some mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated bloodstream. Fishes, on the other hand, have only two chambers to their hearts, and blood is pumped to the gill, is oxygenated there, and passes directly to the rest of the body. Thus, blood goes only once through the heart of the fish during the cycle of the passage throughout the body. On the other hand, it goes through the heart twice during each cycle in other vertebrates. This is known as double circulation. So please remember what is double circulation and in which organism it takes place. Next one is the tubes, that is the blood vessels. Arteries are the vessels which carry blood away from the heart to various organs. So the artery plays the role of carrying the blood away from the heart to various organs. Since the blood emerges from the heart under high pressure, the arteries have thick elastic walls and veins collect the blood from the different organs and bring back to the heart. They do not need thick walls because the blood is no longer under pressure. Instead, they have valves that ensure the blood flows only in one direction. Now, what are the role of platelets? What happens if the system tube develops a leak? Suppose somebody pricks your hand and your blood flows, starting flows. So think about the situation when we are injured and start bleeding. Naturally, the loss of blood from the system has to be minimized. In addition, leakage in lead to loss of pressure would reduce the efficiency of the pumping system. To avoid this, the blood has platelet cells which circulate around the body and plug these leaks by helping to clot the blood at this point of injury. So the blood platelets take an important role in clotting of blood. So whenever there is a leakage of blood by an injury, the platelets form the clotting and it stops it. Next is lymph. There is another type of fluid also involved in the transportation. This is called lymph or tissue fluid. Through these pores present in the walls of the capillaries, some amount of plasma proteins and blood cells escape into the intercellular spaces in the tissues to form the tissue fluid or lymph. It is similar to the plasma of blood but colorless and contains less protein. Lymph drains into lymphatic capillaries from the intercellular spaces which join to form the large lymph vessels that finally open into larger veins. Lymph carries digested and absorbed fat from intestine and drains excess fluid from extracellular space back into the. So what is lymph? Lymphs are the pores present in the walls of capillaries. Then now we saw how the transportation takes place in human. Next, how the transportation in plants takes place. We have discussed earlier how plants take place in simple compounds such as carbon dioxide and photosynthetic energy stored in their chlorophyll containing organs, namely leaves. So it is the leaves which contains energy. The other kind of raw materials needed for building plant bodies will also have to be taken as separately. For plants, the soil is nearest and richest source of raw material like nitrogen, phosphorus and minerals. So the required materials and minerals for the body of plant is fulfilled by the soil. The next one, the absorption of these substances therefore occurs through the part in contact with the soil, namely roots. In the distances between soil contacting organs and chlorophyll containing organs are small. Energy and raw materials can easily diffuse to all parts of the plant body, but if these distances become large because of changes the plant body design, diffusion process will not be sufficient to raw material. The proper system of transportation is therefore essential in such situation. It means if the plant is short, the transportation takes place well, but if the trees are very long, then there is a problem in transportation. Energy needs differ in different body designs. Plants do not move, and plant bodies have a large proportion of dead cells in many tissues. As a result, plant has very low energy need and can use relatively slow transport system. The distance over which transport system have to operate, however, can be very large in plants such as very tall trees. Plant transport systems will move energy stores from leaves and raw materials from roots. These two pathways are constructed as independently organized conducting tubes. The xylem moves the water and minerals obtained from the soil. The other phloem transport the product of photosynthesis from leaves where they synthesize to other parts of the plant. Just we saw in the diagram of the leaves in xylem and phloem. So here xylem plays the role in transportation. It transports the water and minerals obtained from the soil, and phloem transport the products of photosynthesis. Then how the transport of water takes place? In xylem tissues, vessels and tracheids of the roots, stems and leaves are interconnected to form a continuous system of water conducting channel reaching all parts of the plant. At the root, cells in contact with soil actively take up ions. This creates a difference in the concentration of these ions between the root and the soil. Water therefore moves into the root from the soil to eliminate this difference. It means there is a steady movement of water into root xylem, create a column of water that is steadily pushing upwards. However, this pressure by itself is unlikely to be enough to move water over the heights of the commonly see in the plants. Plants use another strategy to move water in the xylem upwards, so the highest point of the plant body. C. Provided that the plant has adequate supply of water by the water from the xylem vessel in the leaf. In fact, evaporation of water molecules from the cells of a leaf creates a suction which pulls water from the xylem of roots. The loss of water in the form of water vapor from aerial parts in the plant is known as transpiration. See how the roots absorb the waters and then it is moved upwards, and then the process of transpiration takes place in which water vapors are lost. Thus, transpiration helps in the absorption of water and movement in the upward direction. Water and minerals are dissolved in it from the roots to the leaves. It also helps in temperature regulation. The effect of root pressure in the transport of water is more important at night. During the day, when the stomata are opened, the transpiration pulse becomes the major driving force in the movement of water and in the xylem. So next we will see excretion. As we said, during the process of digestion there are some undigested particles which are not only harmful to the body but they have to be removed from the body immediately. For this the process is excretion. How the excretion takes place? The excretory system of the human being includes a pair of kidneys and a pair of uterus, a urinary bladder and a urethra. Kidneys are located in the abdomen on the either side of backbone. Urine produced in the kidneys passes through the ureters into urinary bladder, where it is stored until it is released to the urethra. See the diagram. Left internal artery, left kidney, so next question arises, how the urine is produced. The purpose of making of urine is to filter out the waste product from the blood. Just as CO2 is removed from the blood in the lungs, nitrogenous waste such as urea, uric acid are removed from the blood in the kidneys. It is then no surprise that the basic filtration unit in the kidneys, like in the lungs, in a cluster of very thin-walled blood capillaries, each capillary has a cluster in the kidney is associated with a cup-shaped end of a tube that collects the filtered urine. Each kidney has a large number of these filtration units called nephrons. Packed close together, some substances in the initial filtrate such as glucose, amino acid, salts and major amount of waters are selectively reabsorbed. As the urine flows along the tube, the amount of water reabsorbed depends on how much excess water there is in our body.